let's get into the Boston Celtics struggles. Going down 3-0 in the series, you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. No question. You're shooting yourself in the foot. The Celtics were able to battle back, lean back on the defensive end of the ball, which I've been crying for all year in terms of I wanted to see what their offense looked like throughout the season. We had the top offense, and I was like, okay, that's good. We're shooting the three. We're doing things the right way. But we got to see that defensive side of the ball that we need. And we just never got back to that point. And over the course of the series, we saw a lot of things that squeak out. And of course, I just talked about the 3-point line for the Miami Heat. The inability to stop the three ball, guard the 3-point line. For this Miami Heat team, who was the worst shooting team in the regular season? I'm going to start there because that's really the difference in the series. We didn't make an impact on that part of the side of the ball, right? Like getting that taken away from Miami, right? Like not blitzing, not getting guys, not just missing key rotations in terms of what Miami was doing with pick and roll situations and stuff like that. We tried to fight over the screen with our guards. That didn't work. We tried to do switches, which I thought we were a heavy switch team, and then we kind of just went away from that. And in terms of playing drop coverage, and I'm no rocket scientist or X's and O guy, but I think drop coverage is dumb against teams that are really shooting the ball really well. And kind of what we did against the Warriors last season in the finals, and I was like, don't do that again. Like, don't do that again. Just don't do it again. And we ended up doing it against Miami with Al Horford dropping back, Robert Williams dropping back. It's like, no, we need you guys to step up and take on that challenge, or guys to force those guys to make a play there and move them. When you're playing drop coverage, and the picks by Bam was essential this series, and you get solid open space for these guys that are hitting shots, and you back up and give them room, that's probably not the best defensive scheme, right? Like, you got to be able to offset that somehow, right? And I didn't like the drop coverage and stuff like that. And you saw the results with Caleb Martin, the Heat shooting overall. Like, this wasn't Kevin Love. This wasn't Kyle Lowry. This was basically just Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, Caleb Martin on catch and shoot situations, pick and roll situations, pick and pop situations. Like, we should be able to stop that with the defense that we have. We got Marcus Smart, we got Jaylen Brown, we got Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Malcolm Brogdon, who was hurt this series, whatever the case may be. But there should be enough resistance to deter that, right? And we just saw lapses in the Celtics holding up for a certain amount of time, and then just lose a guy at the last second, and the Miami Heat just bomb away from three. That's literally the difference in this series, right? Like, we shot 30% from three as a team. As a team, terrible shooting performances from Jason Tatum from outside, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, who said he was an elite shooter early on in the Philly round, and since then just hasn't been able to catch on. That hurt a lot. Like, when you look at the percentages from those guys, I think Jason Tatum shot 29%, Jaylen Brown was 16 or 19%. It was so low, and Al Horford shot percentage. It's like, it's disgusting how we were one of the better shooting teams in the league during the season, and then in this series we can't hit a shot. And that has ability to do with the zone, right? Like the Miami Heat zone that they threw at us over the course of the series. And looking at that, and guys just weren't able to hit shots, there should be some type of adjustment there. There were times in the game, especially Game 7, where Al Horford was at the free throw line. And it's like, that's something, he's looking to pass the ball. He's not even looking to shoot it in those situations. And there's just scheme-wise, it's like Jason Tatum, who I'll get into in a minute, maybe he should have been there and been the guy making everything happen from that the free throw line to nail. And we just didn't adjust to that, and the zone killed us. We weren't making shots from three. Miami Heat was able to contest and force us to go their way into traps. And it's like, what are we doing? The inability to crack the zone, not getting any dribble penetration there. Derek White was able to get it a couple times, and he was the savior of Game 6. And in Game 7, we're relying on his offense, right? Like in real stretches, like third quarter, fourth quarter on. And I'm just like, if that's what we have, we're probably not going to win this game, right? And that's no shot at Derek White. He's been playing fantastic. But we need our big guns, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, to carry us, and the role players follow behind that. When we're basically living off Derek White's offense running in the game, I'm like, we have no. It looked grim, and that was the sad part about it. And to see it like that is just to see the Celtics season end like that was kind of deflating. And does Jason Tatum's injury have something to do with that? Probably it does, right? Like Jason Tatum's going to probably score 20, 25, 30 points in that game. Maybe that offsets his defense on that side of the ball would be different. All these things happen with the first play of the game, his ankle injury happening. Even with that, the Boston Celtics should figure out a way, especially to attack inside, and especially where we had an advantage inside as well, where the three-point shots weren't falling, the turnovers were massive. Like everything here from this standpoint was catastrophic in those situations, right? Like the ability to not knock down shots, and I think we started off 0 from 10 from 3. And when you do that, you're not giving yourself a chance to win the game at all. You're not. And it just showed that the Boston Celtics have another level that they can go to. There's another level to figure out, and especially on the offensive end. And we have to rely on our defense because that's what happened in games 4, 5, and 6. The ability to get defensive stops, the ability to get steals, push out and transition and get easy buckets, that offsetted our half-court woes last year, right? Like our defense became the number one in the league. We were able to get multiple stops, get multiple easy buckets. That was how things worked for the Boston Celtics last year. And of course, that's the changeover with Ime to Joe. Joe was one of the people that was offensive gurus for the Celtics and stuff like that and made that work. And the defensive end is where we made our bread and butter. That's where we were one of the best teams in the league again this year. But again, it just didn't. We leaned too much to the offensive end of the side. And that's what cost us. And just blunders on the offensive end, the execution, the inability to beat the zone, the inability to stop the three, and the inability to make shots. It blew up for the Boston Celtics. Now, with that being said, now there's a whole situation here. Is it time to break up the Jays? I'm going to say no. And despite that tough series that they had, Jason Tatum with 25 points, 10 rebounds, 5.4 rebounds. Jaylen Brown with 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 3.4 assists. You're looking at this team that have two guys who are 25 and 26 respectively. Jaylen Brown's up for the Supermax with the All-NBA second selection that he made. And people are now running around saying, hey, it's time to break them up. It hasn't worked, whatever the case may be. And I'm going to say to hell with those people. Right? Because these guys have gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals, and of course there's no participation trophies or anything like that. But there's obviously a level that these guys can play together, right? They've shown that last season. They've shown it this season where they're able to take their games to a different level. But there's another level in terms of creation, playmaking for others around them that I think both of these guys need to make. Both of these guys had turnovers in this series. I believe Jason Tatum had 26, Jaylen Brown had 25. Glaring turnovers for Jaylen in Game 7, where it seemed like he couldn't go left. Miami just swiped at the ball every time. Just put your hand in there. You're gonna poke it loose. So those are things that the Celtics need to work on. Creation, especially the Jays, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Creation for others. Jason Tatum has been able to do that in high pick and roll situations and at certain points of the season when he's able to pass. And there's no doubt in my mind that would have been the go-to plays in Game 7, where we would have gave the ball to Jason Tatum at the high pick and roll and move the ball, because Jason Tatum at least creates a double team, at least creates some type of impact on that end. Jaylen Brown, to that degree, if he has it going, maybe he does that. But that's not his game. He's not going to be that creator which we need him to be. And I feel like another level of his development that needs to come. But I'm not going to sit here and these guys both averaged 30 points and I believe 26 points respectively, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and have improved every season, right? Like they've gotten to the line more. They've rebounded more this season. They have been able to take over games this season throughout all the highs and lows of the season and stuff like that. Still one of the better teams in the league. Still one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. No, I don't think you break these guys up. I think there's another level roster-wise that you can figure things out. Maybe give them a little bit more depth health in terms of on the front court line. Other things like that. I'll speak into that. But in terms of breaking up the Jays, I'm not doing that because when you look around the league, and especially let's just start with the Eastern Conference. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks situation with Giannis, whose contract is going to be up in a couple of years. Chris Middleton needs to be signed. Brook Lopez needs to be signed. Who knows what the Bucks are going to look like? You move down the line, Philadelphia. We don't know the situation with James Harden, but it just appears that we have Philadelphia's number, right? Nick Nurse is going to come in. He's the new coach for them. I still think we're better than Philadelphia. Look at Cleveland with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, those two bigs, and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. They're a couple years away, I think, as we saw in the Knicks series. Before taking another step. The Knicks are probably potentially the guys that can make a big-time move and make a trade or something that happened. They were able to build off last season, actually advancing to the second round. Have some stability there with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, whatever they're going to do with him. I believe I just saw they're going to looking to part ways with their GM, so that's going to be interesting, especially with Bob Myers recently just leaving Golden State, stepping down from Golden State. I'll make another video about that probably towards the offseason. But looking down the line, it's like I don't see any other team here in the Eastern Conference that can really compete with the Jays on that level. And that's an opportunity for this team to look to get better, improve on certain situations. But Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown both have another level to go to. Is that another level that I feel like is capped in Boston or can't be reached? No, because these guys have made strides every season. They've gotten stronger. They have worked on their bodies. Now I think there's just a development in terms of playmaking, creation, watching film. Of course, these guys watch film, but I'm just talking about an ability to make things easier for other guys around them. And maybe this is not even a conversation if they get to the finals, right? Like if they get to the finals, this is not a conversation. If they don't go down 3-0, this is not a conversation. If they didn't lose to the Miami Heat, this is probably not a conversation, right? But because the way it happened and the way they lost and the way they went out, now it's becoming a conversation. People are saying all these trades for Jaylen Brown and all this other stuff. Let me get into that point. Mm-hmm. People are weary of paying Jaylen Brown $50 million or whatever the Supermax is for him over the next couple of years. And the NBA salary cap is obviously going to go up, but the CBA has done something where the aprons for tax leverage and all that stuff come into play. And I'm like, I think there's going to be some changes there that people don't see in case of like what the rising cap aprons. Basically, there's a salary cap that teams have. If they go with the first apron, they pay penalties like 1.5 times whatever millions they are over the cap towards the league or whatever the case in tax and stuff like that. If they go over the second apron now, apparently in the new CBA, it limits their mid-level exception, meaning that they can offer, I think, $5 to $7 million in the offseason for free agents, veteran free agents. They can't do that anymore. They can't trade future draft picks into the future. They can't do that anymore, and they have to pay taxes on that. The taxes are insane, or whatever the case may be. People are criticizing Jaylen Brown, and of course, rightfully so with the turnovers, right? Like we saw this last season. It was like, hey, this was area of concern last year that we saw time and time again that piled up and was an issue. And it comes into this season, same thing happening, but the scoring takes off, the rebounding takes off, the offensive end of the floor for these guys take off, especially for Jaylen Brown to make that All-NBA team selection, be one of an All-Star again. All these little cracking points that he reaches, all these benchmarks that he hits. And I'm fine with that, but I just feel like there's a development with now creation, handle, the ability to read defenses. We saw a lot of the times him run into a crowd and try to shoot the ball or take a bad shot or whatever the case may be, or when he's dribbling, trying to set up his move. We've seen it work countless times over the course of the season. And then in the playoffs, especially in Miami, people just swipe at the ball and steal the ball and create turnovers. That's something that's fixable, I believe, and that's just something that he needs to basically be able to read the plays better and get those situations to move the ball and understand that it's going to come back to you because you're one of the best players on the team. And now I'm hearing all these trades for Jaylen Brown. People are saying trade Jaylen Brown. I've heard DeMar DeRozan, people saying DeMar DeRozan. And I lost my mind at that because I'm like, we've seen DeMar DeRozan in Toronto. Great mid-range play over the course of the season. Efficient offensively. But in the playoffs, he does not show up at all. Like, we've seen it throughout time. It's kind of like that Paul George thing where people were kind of shitting on Paul George. And I'm like, Paul George has at least gotten to Eastern Conference Finals and done some things and has some body of work in the playoffs that I think people ignore a little bit. But DeMar DeRozan, people just said, yo, trade for DeMar DeRozan. And I'm like, well, have we seen this guy in the playoffs? Like, even in San Antonio, maybe that's not his offensive fit. But he had some series that he could have won in San Antonio. And I saw him continuously not try to take over. The reason why he got kicked out of Toronto, essentially, is because he didn't want to shoot the three. One year he shot the three and it was good, and it looked like they were taking the next level. And then he reverted back to shooting the mid range because that's what he's comfortable with, and that's fine. You know who you are, whatever the case may be. But the failure to evolution, to evolve your offense and take it to another level. I'm just saying, like, I'm not going to trade for that. People said Bradley Beal because he's cool with Jason Tatum. If I have to trade for Bradley Beal and his contract, he's played less games every season since the scoring title in Washington. If I have to trade for Bradley Beal to gain Jason Tatum's confidence, we already lost Jason Tatum. I'm just going to say that because I'm not trading for Bradley Beal and trading Jaylen Brown in the same conference for Jaylen Brown to take Washington to a different level and then to see Bradley Beal just be a friend, a little bit better fit next to Jason Tatum because he could shoot the ball and certain things like that. I'm not doing that. And especially after the contract that he had, just signed the Supermax, get that Supermax to Jaylen Brown, in my opinion, if that's your best option. I've seen crazy things like people said LaMelo Ball, because that's going to be a point guard to be able to get everybody involved. That's an intriguing one, but the injury prone, the ability not to sustain that, his health, I would be hesitant to do that, and you're going to have to pay him anyway, regardless, right? And then what is that? What is your rest of your team? What is the next move in terms of the backcourt? Of course, you're going to try to keep Marcus Smart next to him, or whatever the case may be, or whatever trade with Charlotte, whatever that would happen. I'm just like, I'm not doing that. Now, people go to Portland, of course. They say Dame Lillard. People have flipped that and said, get the number 3 pick in Anthony Simons, and you're able to build. And it's like, yeah, Jason Tatum's 25, and maybe there's a course of action there where you can kind of develop a point guard and have Anthony Simons as a guy score off the bench or a starter or whatever the case may be with that. But no. Like that's now setting back Tatum a little bit here, where you have to basically essentially grow whatever third person you're trying to pick, even Scoot Henderson or whatever the case may be like that, and figure out the rest of the roster. Like, no, I don't want to go backwards. I feel like that's a backwards move. Yeah, you're setting up for the future, but we've seen teams try to do that and it not work. So all these trade suggestions for Jaylen Brown, maybe the Anthony Simons and third round pick makes sense on paper in terms of, hey, we can reset, kind of reassess, maybe flip that third round pick, whatever the case may be. But it's like, Jaylen Brown's an all-star. Jaylen Brown's one of the better guards in the league. Yes, the turnovers are an issue, free throw shooting and stuff like that of that nature. But Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, we just need another level of development from those two guys, and I think we're going to get that. So in the case of trying to trade Jaylen Brown, no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not for that. No, I don't want that at all. No, not at all. No, just sign Jaylen Brown and figure it out. If he wants to leave in 2-3 years, okay. Like, at least you try to give it another shot, try to pull this together and try to get to a championship with these two guys. I'm fine with that. That should be the answer. Sign Jaylen Brown, give it another 2-3 years, and then if he wants to leave or whatever the case may be, if it's that bad in Boston relationship wise, then move on from him. But I'm not trading him for DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, LaMelo Ball, Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons in this third round pick. I'm not doing that. I just feel like that's not the move to make. And I feel like you're taking a step back to hopefully hope that this development happens with a potential player with Anthony Simons, if that's a better matchup. And it's like, defensively, what does that do for you, just thinking wise? And offensively, does that make you a better team? I'm not sure about that. Now is it time to fire Joe Mazzula? Do I think we should have fired Ime Udoka? No. That's just my personal opinion. But whatever situation that happened in this climate, you cannot afford for the alleged stuff that happened, but he's hired in a year to Houston. That's a whole different situation. But in course of what was happening in Boston at that time, Boston felt like that was the best move to make. And it was right up before the season. They flipped to Joe Mazzula. I found out that he has 3 years, $14 million left on his deal. So that's just underneath $5 million. I don't know what the price tag for coaches around the league is. Mike Budenholzer was getting $8 million. So to see Joe Mazzula get $4.6 million roughly, it's like, oh, okay. So there's at least a little bit of commitment there to him, right? And this season was bumpy at times. I think the offense took off earlier in the season. He figured out some things that we kind of needed to do. I think we lost a little bit defensively there. And, of course, people are going to rip him apart for the rotations. We had that issue with Ime, of course. Had that issue with Brad Stevens. Defensively, I just don't think he was there in terms of making adjustments and certain things of that nature, and reluctance to do stuff in terms of adjustments over the course of games, attacking the basket, not shooting the three as much, changing up the defense, trying anything basically to just win the game. Where we just saw in the Eastern Conference Finals, he's the least experienced coach in terms of experience, right? Like Darvin Ham, Mike Malone, Eric Spoelstra all have experience prior to becoming head coaches as assistants, longevity as an assistants as well, and now they're head coaches. So the ability to make adjustments, galvanize off a team, and do things of that's a struggle point for him just because of the way the season started and everything came into play. And over the course of the season, you're going to take your lumps and stuff like that. So that was expected. I'm not going to sit there and say pour water on him. But the Boston Celtics are not going to fire him. Let's just get that out the way. Unless it goes dastardly wrong next season in terms of a slow start, something of that nature, that's where I see the Celtics are going to fire him. So all the people saying now, fire him now. And he did save his job coming back from 3-0, right? Like, we have to kind of give him credit for that because it's like, yeah, that was the save face or whatever the case may be, but you extended the series at least. If he would have got swept, I think there would have been a strong possibility of him getting fired. But now that he was able to extend that, I don't think they're going to fire him, especially with the years on his deal and stuff like that. The Celtics aren't going to do that, especially they already have 3 coaches in 4 years, right? To have 4 coaches in 5 years, that looks very unsustainable. Like, that just looks like there's the franchise is in a state of flux with that. That's like the Sacramento Kings all those years ago when they hired a bunch of coaches, fired a bunch of coaches, and like year in, year out, guys were in and out. You don't want that situation because you want to try to show stability, especially in the front office and in the coach's chair. You want to show stability there. So that brings me to my next thing here. And I think people forget that Damon Stoudemire, who is one of the better assistants for the Boston Celtics, departed to go coach, I think, Georgia Tech or Wake Forest. I'm not sure. But he left to go get a coaching job opportunity in college. And the Celtics did not fill those assistant spots. And a lot of those guys there that were assistants were Ime's guys, Ime Udoka's guys. So that isn't his staff. Those guys aren't in the veteran roles that they were with Ime. So looking ahead, it looks like those guys are going to be going to Houston and try to pivot and get their coaching opportunities down there in Houston with a guy that they actually coached with, built a relationship with, had a different level there that they have in Mazzulla. I believe they said that they're going to be looking to Joe Mazzula to hire his own staff, or at least they were talking to Stephen Silas, the former Rockets head coach, and Frank Vogel, the former Lakers coach from a year ago. And I thought those were, I don't know if there was contract situations where they couldn't bring them in during the season. I don't think that could have happened. I'm not sure they could have hired them as consultants or whatever the case may be. But it looks like that's where they're heading. And if they are heading towards that way, Stephen Silas was an assistant for a long time, can kind of reach those guys on a different level than the train wreck that was in Houston. Like, people were killing him for crying in front of the players and stuff like that because he was trying to get them to win and come together and trying to reach them. That was just a shitty situation because Houston wasn't trying to win. A lot of guys were just trying to get numbers. Whatever the case of the situation, the owner wants to go in a different direction, all that stuff there. If he's brought in, I feel like that can help the offensive side of the ball and kind of tweak and give somebody Joe to talk to and bounce ideas off a little bit better than he was with the current assistants that the Celtics have. Now, looking at the defensive side of the ball, if you bring those guys in, Stephen Silas and Frank Vogel is one of the better defensive coaches in the league. He had a top stellar defense in Indiana. I believe he had a good defense in Orlando. And when he went to LA, he had a good defense in LA. So I think we could get to that, back to that side of the ball and building a defense up that was similar to what Ime was doing the year prior and what we were doing last year. I think that's the right way to go because now you have somebody that's going to specialize in defense. Frank Vogel does that. And if it's the one thing, if you don't want him as a head coach or whatever the case would be, and people have kind of shitted on him for Indiana, Orlando, and then LA, and people kind of got him out of there, which I don't think it was on him. But if you're going to beef up that side of the ball and get to that X's and O's standpoint where guys that have been in the league for a long time can go, Joe, hey, XYZ, and Joe can kind of bounce ideas off of that and kind of have some type of brainstorming and creativity to both sides of the ball, I'm for that. Lower Al Horford's minutes. I've been screaming this all postseason in the group, the sports group that I'm interested in talk. You got to lower Al Horford's minutes in terms of when he doesn't have it, he doesn't have it. And you have to be able to realize that and be able to pull him and then bring him back in if that's the case. I think we leaned a little bit too much on Al a little bit this season, and especially he's 36 years old. He's going to be 37, 38 on a lower deal. Maybe that will give him a little bit more flexibility, not lean on Al as much, and I think that's probably the best thing, right? Like, we do not need to keep relying on Al Horford. And doing that. Like, we don't have to do that. I think we can figure out something there and lean more on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like, for majority of the season, I was like, yo, play Robert Williams. And yes, he had a stomach virus in game 7. He was throwing up and stuff like that, whatever the case may be. But we got to be able to lean defensively on that side of the ball. That was the Celtics calling card last season. It wasn't so much our calling card this season. Even though we're one of the better teams in the league defensively and offensively, it's like that. But the defense was the calling card for the Boston Celtics. That's what we need on the defensive end of the ball because that creates easy opportunities. It stops the other team from scoring. And we need to be able to shut shit down. Like, we have the personnel to shut shit down. We should be able to shut shit down on the defensive end. And I felt like over the course of the season, he leaned a little bit too much offensively. And especially in the playoffs, he leaned a little bit too much offensively at times. And it was just like, yo, we can – the offense is going to find itself at some point. That's just the way the Celtics for over a decade, even from the Doc Rivers era, has been, right? Like, the offense is going to find itself eventually at some point in time. The calling card is going to be the defensive side of the ball. That is what we need. We need something on the defensive side of the ball to get stops consistently. And I feel like that's something that we need to pay attention to desperately. If the Celtics are going to be able to turn it around and build any type of consistency, the defensive end of the ball is going to have to be the calling card of the Boston Celtics, right? Like, we have to be able to shut shit down like we did over the course of last year. That's what the Celtics have to do. But is it time to fire Joe Mazzula? I don't think so, because I believe the team and the organization, I believe the organization is going to give him at least another year to to figure it out. Get a better coaching staff. I feel like they did a disservice with him in terms of that. And not really addressing the assistant coach's needs right there. And I feel like they realized, hey, we got to give this guy another year. This is our guy that we're committed to, that we're going to try to posture and try to build with. And I feel like that's what the Celtics are going to do in terms of that. Let's get into our NBA Finals preview. Oh, did not click everything, Dana.